A statement just dropped from Louis Vuitton, supposedly from a source close to the brand, and it wasn't what anyone expected. The response was defensive, desperate, and flat out denied everything. "The claims are false," they said. "Every Louis Vuitton product is made to the highest standard." But the cracks were already showing, and the luxury giant was struggling to hold on to its carefully crafted image. The monogram that once symbolized prestige and exclusivity, it was beginning to look like just another marketing facade. Behind the high-end bags, the glossy ads, and the designer runway shows, the truth was creeping out. And it wasn't pretty. This isn't just another luxury scandal that will fade into the background. No, this is a reckoning for Louis Vuitton, a brand that spent over 150 years building its reputation as the epitome of opulence. And who brought it all crashing down? Kanye West. A man known for shaking the fashion world with his unapologetic voice and fearless approach. But this time, Kanye didn't just share an opinion. He unleashed an undeniable truth. In a viral live stream, Kanye tore the curtain back on Louis Vuitton's entire operation, revealing something shocking. The same luxury bags that were marketed as the height of French craftsmanship were, in fact, being manufactured in China, far from the ateliers in Paris. This revelation sent shockwaves through the fashion industry. What was once considered the gold standard of luxury now faced questions about its authenticity. From protests at high-end boutiques to leaked factory receipts and behind-the-scenes footage, the truth about Louis Vuitton's manufacturing practices was exposed for the world to see. The luxury empire was crumbling, and the world's biggest brands had nowhere to hide. As the scandal grows, this video will reveal all the facts, the receipts, the evidence, and the stories behind the viral backlash. You won't want to miss how Louis Vuitton's world of high-end luxury was flipped upside down, and how Kanye West's revelations will change the fashion industry forever. For over a century, Louis Vuitton wasn't just a brand. It was an institution, a symbol of the ultimate in luxury and sophistication. The LV monogram wasn't just a logo. It was a statement, a status symbol that whispered of generational wealth, success, and an untouchable level of prestige. Carrying a Louis Vuitton bag, like the iconic Speedy, spoke volumes about who you were. It said more than any academic degree or prestigious title could. It marked you as someone who had made it to the very top. And the narrative they carefully wove around their products? It was pure fantasy. They painted a picture of French artisans working in Parisian ateliers, using only the finest European leathers, creating timeless masterpieces through generations of expertise and craftsmanship. But that carefully crafted illusion? It was shattered, almost instantly, when Kanye West stepped forward. A man who has built his career on challenging the status quo and speaking truth, no matter the backlash. He didn't just throw out an accusation, he dropped a bombshell. In a stunning live stream, Kanye exposed the truth behind the Louis Vuitton brand. What the world had believed to be a symbol of elite craftsmanship was now revealed to be something far different. Louis Vuitton's bags, which were sold as high-end French luxury, were actually being produced in Chinese factories, far from the glamour of Parisian ateliers. And in that moment, the brand's entire narrative came crashing down. Kanye's revelation wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. It forced the world to ask questions about the authenticity of Louis Vuitton's products, about what luxury really means in a globalized world where branding often trumps substance. For a company that had built its empire on the myth of French craftsmanship, the truth was far more complicated. Behind the monogram, the glittering stores, and the celebrity endorsements, Louis Vuitton was hiding a reality that no amount of marketing could erase. And as Kanye's bombshell began to spread, it ignited a firestorm of backlash, viral protests, and deep dives into the global fashion industry's murky practices. The luxury empire that once seemed invincible was suddenly on the defensive, scrambling to preserve its image and fight back against the inconvenient truths that were being exposed. Kanye West has never been one to shy away from controversy, and in one explosive moment, he tore open a secret that had been quietly circulating among fashion insiders for years. In a raw, unfiltered live stream, Kanye took the world by surprise when he held up what appeared to be a typical Louis Vuitton duffel bag. At first glance, it seemed like any other high-end luxury item, something you'd expect to find in the glimmering windows of Parisian boutiques. But Kanye wasn't just showcasing a bag, he was exposing a hidden truth. "This one didn't come from Paris," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It came from Guangzhou, China." The room fell silent as the shock of his words began to sink in. With the confidence only Kanye could muster, he pointed out the glaring similarities between the Louis Vuitton product and the one he was holding. "Same canvas, same zipper, same stitching, $80, not $3,200, he declared, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. His message was simple but cutting. Louis Vuitton, the iconic brand that had been built on an aura of exclusivity and high-end craftsmanship, was selling the world a lie. He wasn't just calling out bad business practices, he was revealing how deeply entrenched the fashion industry's exploitation truly was. In that moment, Kanye wasn't just questioning a product, he was questioning the entire framework of luxury itself. A bag that cost a fortune, made in the same factory as a cheap knockoff, all sold with a premium price tag. But what made this even more impactful was that this wasn't just another anonymous leak or industry whistleblower. This was Kanye West, global icon, fashion disruptor, and former Louis Vuitton collaborator. Kanye was not some outsider making baseless accusations. He was an insider, someone who had once been a part of the very world he was now exposing. His words carried weight, not only because of his celebrity status, but because of his deep understanding of the inner workings of the fashion industry. This wasn't just a random outburst. It was a calculated strike from someone who had first-hand experience with the brand's inner circle. With one live stream, Kanye West turned the fashion world upside down, forcing Louis Vuitton to face a truth it could no longer ignore. The moment Kanye dropped that bombshell, the internet exploded. It wasn't just another celebrity rant, it was a call to arms for fashion enthusiasts, critics, and consumers alike. Social media platforms were instantly ablaze. TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram flooded with reactions. Side-by-side comparisons of the Gucci knockoff and the Louis Vuitton bag flooded feeds, showing the eerily similar materials and craftsmanship. TikTok influencers took to their cameras, calling out the brand's decades-long deception, with some even burning their own Louis Vuitton bags in protest. The anger was palpable, the disillusionment raw. Within an hour, the hashtag #YouAreLVExposed was trending globally, becoming the rallying cry for a growing army of disillusioned consumers who felt betrayed. Luxury had always promised exclusivity, but now it was starting to look like a well-oiled scam. Fashion forums, usually reserved for deep dives into style trends, exploded in outrage. "The monogram is dead," some declared. The very symbol of luxury, the LV canvas that once represented the pinnacle of craftsmanship and elegance, was suddenly seen as a hollow, overpriced brand. The critics weren't just targeting the bags, they were dismantling an entire culture that had been built on illusion. The luxury fashion world, it seemed, was unraveling right before their eyes. But then, something completely unprecedented happened. Louis Vuitton, the brand that had built an empire on secrecy and mystique, couldn't just ignore the growing storm. The usual silence from high-end brands facing scandals wasn't enough. With the backlash intensifying and public sentiment turning hostile, Louis Vuitton had to respond. But this wasn't just a simple apology or a token gesture. What followed was a move no one saw coming, something that would shape the future of the luxury fashion industry forever. The question wasn't just whether the brand would survive this reckoning, it was whether the entire concept of luxury itself could ever be the same. Louis Vuitton's iconic boutiques, Paris, New York, Tokyo, London, became ground zero for an explosive showdown. But this time, they weren't just bustling with eager customers ready to drop thousands on the latest collections. No, they were under siege. The glittering facades, once symbols of exclusivity and luxury, were now being confronted by a growing wave of furious consumers, intent on calling out the brand's deception. Instead of credit cards, they wielded cell phones, capturing every moment, every word, every confrontation. They weren't there to buy, they were there to demand accountability. Inside the stores, the atmosphere was electric with outrage. One customer, holding a Louis Vuitton Neverfull tote, stood at the center of the chaos, shouting, "Refunds now!" as others filmed, capturing the very essence of the revolt. In an act of rebellion, shoppers used lipstick to scrawl bold, defiant messages on boutique mirrors. Made in China, stop the scam. As the tension heightened, emotions boiled over. In Paris, a store clerk collapsed in tears, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of protesters and the weight of the moment. Outside in Beverly Hills, the once pristine sidewalks were littered with luxury handbags, tossed aside in anger. This wasn't just a social media campaign. It was a visceral, real-world outcry against the betrayal of the brand's values. But the protests didn't stop there. In Tokyo, demonstrators held up QR codes linked directly to leaked invoices from Chinese factories, exposing the truth behind Louis Vuitton's "Made in France" narrative. This wasn't a boycott in the traditional sense. It was a full-scale revolt against an industry built on illusion and exploitation. The world was watching, and as every live stream, every protest, and every social media post spread, the cracks in Louis Vuitton's image only deepened. The brand wasn't just facing backlash, it was facing an unprecedented reckoning that no one had seen coming. As the protests raged on, the spotlight shifted from the streets to the factories. The once silent Chinese manufacturers, long relegated to the shadows of the luxury industry, decided it was their time to fight back. What followed was a flood of incontrovertible proof, receipts, freight manifests, purchase orders, all revealing a disturbing truth. These documents weren't some vague leaks, they were the real deal. LV23 was stamped on purchase orders, each one tied directly to Louis Vuitton's most coveted monogram bags. These weren't just discrepancies, they were clear evidence that Louis Vuitton was sourcing their products from factories in China, far from the ateliers in Paris the brand had so carefully cultivated in the public's mind. As if the paper trail wasn't damning enough, more photos surfaced. In one particularly jarring image, bins of brass hardware labeled LVQ4 stood next to piles of bags nearly finished, waiting for the final stitch in France. The scene told a story of a manufactured lie, a brand built on the narrative of heritage and artisanal craftsmanship now exposed for cutting corners. But the real bombshell came when a factory foreman, unblurred and unabashed, appeared on camera. With a mocking chuckle, he delivered the kill shot. "They cut it in France, we stitch it here. Same bag, better price." The words landed with devastating clarity, confirming the scandal in the most direct way possible. The message was clear. Louis Vuitton was lying to its customers, deceiving them about the origins of the very products they prided themselves on. These bags, sold at astronomical prices, were not born in the heart of France. They were stitched together in factories halfway across the world, in places where cost was cut and labor was cheaper. And yet, the brand had built an empire, charging customers exorbitant amounts for a product with a story that no longer held up. The luxury facade was crumbling, and it was all unraveling in real time. The internet wasn't just watching, it was demanding answers. As the shockwaves of the Louis Vuitton scandal spread across the internet, a new wave of TikTok detectives emerged. Armed with nothing but determination and digital tools, they began to dissect every available scrap of information. Invoice numbers were cross-referenced with shipment trackers, and release dates were overlaid with satellite images showing an inexplicable surge in shipping activity from China every time Louis Vuitton dropped a new collection. The results were staggering. Some weeks saw shipping traffic spike by as much as 1,800%. It wasn't just a blip on the radar, it was a glaring anomaly that demanded an explanation. Was this merely a coincidence, as Louis Vuitton claimed? The internet, with its razor-sharp eye for detail, didn't think so. They were connecting the dots, and what they found didn't add up. In a parallel wave of investigation, heat stamp analysis became the next viral sensation. TikTok users using macro lenses and keen observation began comparing the heat stamps of Louis Vuitton bags side by side. The results were undeniable. Despite the brand's insistence that its bags were crafted in France by skilled artisans, these amateur detectives uncovered striking similarities in the font, indentations, and stitch lengths of the tags. The heat stamps, which Louis Vuitton had long touted as proof of authenticity, were identical across bags marked "Made in France" and those that were now known to be produced in China. The evidence was clear. These bags, sold for premium prices, were not the result of French craftsmanship, but rather a mass production system that stretched across borders. With every new piece of evidence, the illusion of "made in France" began to collapse under its own weight. What had once been a story of luxury and exclusivity was revealed to be a house of cards built on Chinese labor and corporate loopholes. The internet wasn't just outraged, it was determined to expose the truth, and it wasn't going to stop until Louis Vuitton was held accountable. The brand's carefully constructed narrative had been torn apart, and no amount of corporate spin could cover up the truth any longer. As the backlash grew, some of the biggest names in entertainment began to weigh in, making the scandal impossible to ignore. Cardi B took to Twitter, cutting through the corporate spin with a simple but powerful question. Why pay $5K for a bag if the factory sells it for $60? That's clown math. Her tweet wasn't just a call-out, it was a challenge to the entire luxury industry. Meanwhile, Julia Fox joined the chorus, mocking the once iconic brand by dubbing the Louis Vuitton monogram "mall brand energy," a cutting remark that shattered the illusion of exclusivity. And it didn't stop there. Reality TV mogul Bethany Frankel made her stance clear by tossing 3 Louis Vuitton clutches straight into the trash, live on Instagram, making an undeniable statement of defiance against a brand that had betrayed its loyal customers. On TikTok, the response was swift and unforgiving. The platform, known for its viral power, became ground zero for the luxury scam movement. Influencers and regular users alike began posting dupe hauls, comparing genuine Louis Vuitton bags to their much cheaper, factory-made counterparts. With every new video, the hashtag #YourLuxuryScam spread like wildfire, accumulating over 300 million views. What was once a niche topic had become a global conversation, with people from all walks of life questioning the true value of luxury goods. Louis Vuitton's aura of prestige and exclusivity had been exposed as nothing more than a marketing illusion, a mirage that had fooled consumers for years. As the scandal snowballed, Louis Vuitton's reputation, once regarded as untouchable, began to crack under the weight of the revelations. The monogram, a symbol of wealth and status, now felt hollow and artificial, like cheap vinyl instead of premium leather. What was once the epitome of luxury craftsmanship now seemed like little more than a product of corporate deception. And as the backlash intensified, Louis Vuitton found itself facing a crisis of trust, one that could change the fashion industry forever. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. As the public uproar reached a fever pitch, inside LVMH, Louis Vuitton's parent company, panic quickly turned to damage control. Behind closed doors, whispers of a covert strategy known as Operation Glass House began circulating. The plan? To restore the tarnished image of the iconic brand. Microchip authentication was introduced as a way to prove authenticity, with hopes that this high-tech solution would quell the growing tide of skepticism. Alongside that, live-streamed atelier tours were announced, intended to offer a glimpse into the crafting process, presumably to show consumers that Louis Vuitton's luxury bags were still made by skilled artisans in French ateliers. But despite these desperate attempts, it became clear that Louis Vuitton's attempts to fix its image weren't resonating with its audience. Then, in a bold move that showcased how far Louis Vuitton was willing to go, talks of moving all manufacturing back to France began to surface, paired with the inevitable massive price hikes to cover the costs of such a move. But the damage had already been done. Gen Z, the very generation that Louis Vuitton had spent years marketing to, was now completely uninterested in these corporate maneuvers. The traditional luxury branding, with its focus on heritage and exclusivity, simply wasn't enough to convince a generation that demands authenticity and transparency. Unlike the old guard of luxury consumers who were content with the mystique of the brand, Gen Z wants to know exactly where their money is going and who is making their products. For them, trust isn't just about a name or a logo, it's about truth. For Louis Vuitton, this marked the ultimate betrayal. They hadn't just been selling bags, they'd been selling an illusion. An illusion that was now crumbling before their eyes, as social media and investigative efforts peeled back the layers of the brand's carefully curated image. The reality was clear. Consumers were no longer willing to turn a blind eye to the hypocrisy. The luxury market was at a crossroads, and Louis Vuitton was no longer the unassailable icon it once was. The era of blind loyalty to high-end brands was over, and transparency had become the new luxury standard. For decades, the narrative was clear. China only made knockoffs. Luxury goods, we were told, were the exclusive domain of the West. High-end brands like Louis Vuitton sold us a dream of craftsmanship rooted in French ateliers and timeless traditions. Yet, the truth is much more complex and much more unsettling. China, often painted as the villain in the luxury world, had been quietly mastering the art of production for years. With precision and efficiency, Chinese manufacturers were turning out the same quality goods, often at a fraction of the price. Meanwhile, the West, led by legacy brands, continued to sell us the same products, marked up 50 times or more, under the guise of exclusivity and craftsmanship. The real question? Who's the true innovator here, and who's been peddling a lie? Kanye West didn't just whisper about these discrepancies. He detonated the entire facade. His unflinching, raw livestream wasn't just a call-out. It was an explosion of truth that shook the very foundations of the luxury industry. By exposing the realities of mass production and showing the world the receipts, Kanye shattered the fantasy that luxury brands had so carefully constructed over generations. The public could no longer ignore the glaring discrepancies between what they were being sold and the reality behind the labels. The monogram was no longer a symbol of prestige, it became the symbol of deception. And the damage wasn't limited to Louis Vuitton alone. Kanye's revelations cracked open the entire luxury market, revealing a web of corporate deception that reached far beyond one brand. As the dust settled, it became undeniable. Once the spell is broken, no monogram can stitch it back together. The magic of luxury brands, carefully built over decades, has lost its power. Consumers demand authenticity now more than ever. Louis Vuitton and others in the industry can no longer hide behind clever marketing and fabricated legacies. With receipts in hand and a spotlight on their practices, the public has seen through the smoke and mirrors, and the luxury industry, as we once knew it, will never be the same again. The age of truth has arrived. No designer label can shield you from it.